Hi, I'm Al Hunt. Welcome to the show. You're in the War Room. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Now let's get on to impeachment and politics. We're discussing the constitutional questions of impeachment and Attorney General William Barr, and we are joined by the premier guest. Walter Dellinger, professor of law at Duke University, where he once was acting dean. He headed the Office of Legal Counsel and was Solicitor General in the Clinton Justice Department. He has argued scores of cases before the United States Supreme Court. As a University of North Carolina man, he will appreciate this. He is the Michael Jordan of constitutional experts. Walter, it's good to have you.
I just aspire to be Dennis Rodman. Come on, that's my.
All right, let me just start off by saying the impeachment is going in full gear now, or the impeachment process. Let me just start off with a couple of the Republican arguments and then turn it over to James. One, they say, hey, no crime was committed, so no impeachment.
Well, first of all, it's a two-part response. First, it is not necessary by any means that an impeachable offense be a crime. And secondly, yes, of course, crimes were committed. There was an attempted obstruction of justice, an attempt to extort or bribe a foreign country, and the president didn't even have the good grace to put his own money on the line. $400 million of taxpayers' money was used as the bait. But let me address the first question, because I think it's going to be important in other contexts, and that is why an impeachable offense is something different from a crime. The worst offenses committed by a president may not be anything that Congress ever thought they needed to pass a federal statute amending the penal code to, for example, make it a crime for a president willfully to refuse to defend the United States against foreign attack. You can search the penal code and all the drug, narcotics offenses and everything else and not find a crime of a presidential refusal to defend the United States against foreign attack. And so it makes no sense. By no means is everything that is criminal an impeachable offense. Only a small category of matters that are criminal would be impeachable offenses, because to be true to the reading of the Constitution, it would take something much more serious. So, I mean, I think if we could take just a minute at the outset here to see what the framers thought before they settled on the current and familiar phraseology that the president and all other officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. At the very beginning of the convention, the president could be impeached for maladministration or neglect of duty. When they gave more power to the president, they thought that it was important to that was too vague. That meant you served at the pleasure of Congress. They tried treason and bribery alone, but thought that wouldn't cover many very serious offenses by a president. So they added this phrase from the English, high crimes and misdemeanors, which was a term of art, a phrase that meant very serious crimes against the state. And they have to be things like treason and bribery in the same level of seriousness. So I think the best definition from the classic Nixon-era work by Charles Black is that high crimes and misdemeanors are offenses which are, one, extremely serious. They are in some way corrupt or subvert the political and governmental processes, and finally are plainly wrong, in themselves to a person of honor. And so I think here it is plainly wrong. The worst way to characterize the offenses of this president is that he has attempted to use the powers of his office corruptly to influence the next presidential election.
Which is what he was doing with Ukraine. I would point out you were the prize protege of Yale Law School professor Charles Black, who did write the definitive work on impeachment back in 1974. The second point they make is, okay, fine, shouldn't have been done, but Ukraine got its assistance. The president over there did not announce an investigation of the Bidens, so no harm, no foul.
Well, the three-word answer to that is he got caught. He attempted to extort from them a public statement. And there's no indication that he wanted Ukrainian officials to investigate young Mr. Biden. He wanted an announcement on CNN that Biden was under investigation, and that because he got caught, because someone reported that, the Washington Post was all over it. Congress demanded to know what was going on. They rushed out the funds, having completed this attempt. So what we're really talking about is a president who has shown that he is not willing to abide by the constitutional processes of fair elections. He got caught before he completed the demand for a public statement of investigating Biden. But let's stop just for a moment on this particular point, because it maps so perfectly on Watergate. The one misstatement that I think has been made by Adam Schiff is the statement that Watergate was a third-rate burglary. And now the press is people saying, well, there's just one phone call and nothing came of it. That misses the point that both Watergate and the present Trumpgate, both of them were efforts to subordinate the Constitution of the United States and to distort the next presidential election, and in particular to do it by getting rid of what they thought was the most serious opposing candidate. So the Plumbers operation under Watergate, of which the break-in at the Watergate Hotel and the ensuing cover-up was just one part, the Plumbers operation began as an effort to disrupt the campaign of Democrat Ed Muskie, moderate of Maine, who the polls were showing at the time the Plumbers operation started appeared to be the candidate most likely to beat Richard Nixon. And they actually did disrupt the Muskie campaign. They brought him to tears in Maine with their constant disruptive activities.
New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, and I'm sorry, in New Hampshire, you're right. And they wound up with a Democratic nominee who lost 49 states. And
that was the same thing they were trying to do with Joe Biden this time.
And the same thing they're trying to do with Joe Biden this time. And keep in mind the fact that in July, when this undertaking started, Vice President Biden looked more formidable than he does now, perhaps. But he was certainly polling as the candidate most likely to beat Trump back when they started this operation. So in both cases, not being willing to trust to the people in a fair election, they used underhanded and potentially criminal activities in order to interfere with that election. And that's why you can't let it go.
Let me turn it over to that distinguished graduate of the LSU Law School, James Carville, to follow up on that.
I'm going back to the Clinton impeachment and our involvement in this. Impeachment is a constitutionally sanctioned and authorized process. I don't remember us. I certainly remember us attacking Starr and his partisanship and everything else. I don't remember anybody saying we're just going to ignore subpoenas. I really don't. I mean, David Kendall and Nicole went down and argued with the Senate, and President Clinton actually testified. I mean, it seems to me what they're doing is just we don't accept the legitimacy of this investigation, which in itself is a crime, I think.
I totally agree. It's a obstruction of justice, and I think that it would be a mistake not to make this part of any set of articles of impeachment. It's just astounding and jaw-dropping that they would not comply with congressional oversight, which has been done through the issuance of perfectly valid subpoenas. Now, there is an argument that some discussions between a president and his most senior aides may be protected by a presumptive executive privilege. I think that can largely be overcome in the case of an impeachment inquiry, where you need to find out everything. But let's assume that there is some residual executive privilege there. They're claiming the president has ordered everybody, people he never met or heard of, not to comply with subpoenas. one of the people that testified over the president's objection, for whom they had claimed this executive privilege, was, by my count, a fourth level down person at OMB. 4 levels down. President never saw this guy. He may never have been in the West Wing. And what was their basis? As James noted, their basis was they have denominated the inquiry and the other congressional inquiries, like the one for the tax returns, as illegitimate. And so they have self-described it. They have made a unilateral decision that it is illegitimate. And I think it has to be itself a grounds of impeachment that they won't turn this stuff over.
You know, I think my own view is this. This all started with Bush v. Gore. And what that showed them was we're just going to overturn a state-authorized recount and stop it. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to get away with it. And you know what happened? They did. They just did. They just rammed through it. They went through 2015. They rammed through every gerrymander that you could imagine. They wrote maps that an ordinary person would have never thought of to do it. They just gutted through it. Then Merrick Garland, they just said, we're not going to do it. We don't care. And they keep winning. And what's going to happen at the end of this is they'll impeach him, and the Republicans will say it was all make up something. I mean, they just make up this about Ukraine at the Senate Intelligence Committee. But they're not going to stop because, in their opinion, they're getting away with it. And that's a dangerous place for a country to go, but that is what they say. We just gut it out, and every time we gut it out, Bush was president, we control the Supreme Court, we control the federal judiciary, we have gerrymandered every seat that we could find. And all of this, to me, is just destructive to the country.
James, you make a very good point. I don't know what all they taught you at LSU Law School, but you made a hell of a point that this starts with Bush versus Gore. I haven't seen that from anybody, but I think you're right. I remember thinking, because Ted Olson had been someone I had known and had been helpful to me when I took over the Office of Legal Counsel, which he had once headed. I was really, when he filed his petition to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene and set aside the Florida court's final determination, which was going to be a recount that would have shown that Gore won. When he filed his petition, I thought it's so embarrassing that they had no legal arguments for U.S. Supreme Court intervention, and that it would be really an embarrassment to Ted Olson to have filed that brief. And he winds up winning. What
they taught me at LSU Law School is the same thing that they teach at Duke Law School or Harvard School, is that you can understand the law, you can interpret the law. At some point, you can manipulate it to your client's favor. But the one thing you can't do is ignore the law.
Right.
Right. No one. I never had a law professor. I don't think you ever told a student you can ignore the statute. You can read it with another statute, or you can doubt the constitutionality of the statute, or you can say it means one thing, or you can talk about legislative extent. But what they do is just say it doesn't exist.
You know, James, I think you've taken this to a level that goes beyond even the present impeachment, and that is the question about what is happening to the legitimacy of constitutional government. When you put it that way, think about the fact that we now have 4 justices who were appointed by presidents who came into office having lost the national popular vote. And if Trump were to be reelected, we could have a solid majority of the Supreme Court. And if he is, quote, reelected, he will do so by having lost between 5 and 10 million votes nationally. You know, you have to wonder how long states like California and Washington and Oregon that would be an economic juggernaut in alliance with perhaps, Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, or on their own, an economic powerhouse on their own, how long they would put up with a list of grievances about this, of the kind that we have from this president, that I think are much more serious than the list of grievances against King George. They were issued by colonies who wanted to be independent states in 76. You've got a court that, when they struck down the part of the Voting Rights Act, they were substituting their judgment for Congress. The Civil War, the Great Civil War Amendment says Congress shall have the power to enforce this. And the voting rights decision, they had not was just wrongly decided, they had no business deciding it. So between that and green-lighting gerrymandering, it's...
Look at what Barr did to the Mueller report.
Right.
Just kept it under wraps and lied. They don't care. You understand that you teach your students, and your whole career was how to deal with the law. You say, well, I see it this way, you see it that way. What they do is they just ignore it. I literally, there's no other explanation that I can come to. Is P sue, like every law student goes, P sues D. Okay?
Right.
D says, D has to answer the lawsuit.
Right.
Has to acknowledge the legitimacy of it. You can say, well, it was a comparative negligence, or I don't know what the hell it was, but you have a bunch of defense, but you just can't say, well, that's it, I ignore it, I don't care, it's not the law.
No professor ever gave you the hypothetical. It never occurred to me. Well, suppose D has exclusive control over nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Then how does D respond?
The Attorney General is
let's talk about this Attorney General. Walter, when he was appointed, I talked to you and a number of other like-minded scholars who said, look, he's very conservative, we'll disagree with him on issues like criminal justice, immigration, and court appointments, but he's a straight shooter. Well, starting with the Mueller report reaction, which was incredibly, I would call it dishonest. It was certainly disingenuous. He now appears to be taking issue with the long-awaited Inspector General's report that the FBI investigation into the Russian interference in the American election to help Trump was legitimate. Do you still think he's a straight shooter? He's Trump's Attorney General, not America's.
No, I don't think he was. He didn't shoot straight on the Mueller report by any means. He was deliberately misleading. When you read the report, it was just shocking to see, how distorted it was. I think, by the way, going back to where we started the conversation and bringing it right up to where we are now, the Mueller report, it's a hard question, but I think it would be a mistake for the Democrats to continue to walk away from the Mueller report and not to go back. And it's just, if you reread the executive summary on obstruction of justice. I mean, Mueller concludes, in 444 pages, 1,200 footnotes, 100 contacts, in the first part between the Trump organization. What he says on no collusion, and I wouldn't go back to that, but all he says was we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an actual agreement between Trump campaign officials and the Russians. Not that there wasn't an actual agreement. We can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And not that they weren't acting in concert. It's just that we don't have an actual agreement. When you get to obstruction of justice, Mueller lets us down by not stating what obviously is the sentence that would be his conclusion, that the president committed multiple, even though we cannot indict him under Department of Justice policy, we nonetheless conclude and must so state that he committed multiple acts of felonious obstruction of justice. And he said, if we believed he could be cleared, we would have cleared him. We can't clear him. And so it's just shocking. I mean, he on multiple occasions he tried to shut down the investigation into the Russian interference in the election. He ordered the White House counsel to have him fired. It's over and over again.
It's the dishonesty of the Attorney General. Once that got out there, all right, we were dishonest in New Hampshire in 1992 when we came out early and declared victory and Congress actually beat us. All right, that's a kind of manipulation of public opinion, getting ahead of the story. This is not the Attorney General looking at an authorized report and lying to the American people about it.
That's true. That's what this is, and this is now normal. I think we need to see the links between the Mueller report and where we are with the more recent matter of Ukraine. Ukraine is just the president's hand getting caught in the cookie jar. But what we have is a consistent effort. I think he knows he cannot win a fair election. And And once again, I mean, Kathleen Hall Jameson's going to have a new version out of her book in January, concluded that it's very likely that the Russians handed the election to Hillary based on in-depth studies. But what he's doing now, to blame Ukraine is to exonerate Russia. To exonerate Russia is to tell Putin, here's how much we have your back. We're not only not going to respond to your direct attack on American democracy, we're going to even blame someone else. We're going to help you go look for the real killers.
It's the OJ defense.
And that is the ultimate green light to the Russians to go all out to deliver the next election for Trump, is for Trump to even deny that they did it in 2016 and that they are working as we speak to disrupt the election.
I just want to make sure you're right. What you're saying, that we have it right. You would advise the Judiciary Committee to put the Mueller obstruction charges in the bills of impeachment?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Terrific. Boy, you've been wonderful. Thank you for enlightening us.
Thank you so much, Prof. I get a free, like I've got a free law school lesson, you know? How fascinating.
Great to talk to you guys. You made the best point of the day, James. Take care.
Take care, Walter.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, James, we've talked impeachment with one of the great experts in the country. Let's talk politics now. The big news this week is Kamala Harris, who people like Rachel Maddow was 6 months ago was saying is going to be the Democratic nominee, dropped out of the race this week. Why did Harris never take off?
If anybody wants to know, read a piece in the New York Times of Jonathan Martin earlier this week. It literally will be used as, like the Harvard Business School uses these case studies, or you go to law school, Walter Dellinger teaches you how you learn everything through this one case. This is an example of everything that you should not do in a campaign, of the Harris campaign doing it. It was, if they could do 10 things wrong, they did all 10.
Maybe 11.
And you're right. Maybe 11. And she came on, and she was like a big, rangy, double-A person that was just crushing fastballs, and people were coming from miles around to see him play. And then the first time a Major League slider came, and the way he was. And I mean, she looked so good on paper, and everything about her was compelling, and she was kind of bigger than life, and she was, mixed race, United States senator,
female
prosecutor,
Obama,
female, yes, but at first slider, she didn't even come close, and she just sat there. From everything, from having two headquarters to having an assistant in charge of the campaign to, trying 5 different things at the same time. I mean, it was just a disastrous campaign. That woman has a lot of future ahead of her, But I don't see. I'll be honest with you, Al, but I don't know if some of these Democrats are trying to win. Just no malarkey. I'd love to know how they came up with that.
That's Joe Biden.
Who sat in a meeting? Yeah, who sat in a meeting and said, we need to get some more younger voters, so let's talk about malarkey?
Yeah, that was probably Joe. Let me
just pick up on
let me just pick up on that. I agree with everything you said, and I love that John Martin piece. I would just note very parochially that I wrote an abbreviated version of that in a column a month ago. And the point was that John McCain one time advised John Kerry, this hero stuff is great. We're both heroes. This is 2002. But when what a hero does, it gets you in the room. And then you got to have something to say. And there was no bigger hero than John Glenn. And once he got in the room in his presidential quest, he didn't have much to say. Kamala, not that she was a hero, but as you say, on paper, she was a great prospect. And she got in that room, and she didn't have anything to say.
But people paying attention like they are. I mean, one thing, that first debate when she didn't know anything about health care, you kind of knew, gee, this is not going well.
You did. You mentioned the Biden thing. Let me go. I'm going to stay on the bees for a minute and not Biden. Steve Bullock also dropped out this week, and Michael Bennett, who probably is the favorite candidate for Carville and Hunt, is just going nowhere. I have to admit. I hate to admit that. These are two guys who, again, are so impressive on paper. I mean, Bennett, probably there's no United States senator that I would be as confident would be as good a president as Michael Bennett. And Steve Bullock was just the prototype of what Democrats need, a really mainstream progressive who won big in a red state. Why, James? Does it say something about the system or about them?
I don't know, probably a little bit, but I'm for Michael Bennett. I'm not even being cute about it. And say, why am I? Because what I say, if 25 people with 20/20 vision say, James, you got some shaving cream on your earlobe, you probably have shaving cream on your earlobe. Well, if 25 people whose opinions I respect start the conversation, well, James, you know, if Michael Bennett would be the best president, then goddamn it, why not be for him? And I'm going to, I mean, it probably won't win, but in New Hampshire, anything can happen. And I think that if he goes up there and really engages and has a campaign that fits his skill set, and that would be, you know, small events with a lot of dialogue, and did a lot of them in the course of the day, I can't tell you that he'd win. He probably won't. But just what I know about New Hampshire, they will give him a look. If you go up there and ask for a look, they'll give you a look.
This is your idea, but, you know, one day meet with veterans, one day with nurses, one day with Trump voters, one day with NRA gun people, and Michael Bennett will never shine in a 8-person debate because he's not a demagogue. He's not going to give a great speech because that's not what he does well. He's not going to have far better TV ads than anybody else. But what he can do is sit at that table, and I'm stealing this from you, James. He can sit at that table for an hour and a half, and he can have a dialogue and impress people probably more than anyone else in the field.
I begged him to do that. It said, all you got to do is just put it online. It doesn't, you know, just do it online. Let everybody watch it. Michael Bennett talks to Iowa teachers. Michael Bennett talks to Iowa farmers. Michael Bennett talks to New Hampshire conservatives. Michael Bennett talks to, you know, African-American churchgoers in Charleston. Michael Bennett talks to incarcerated, you know, people in halfway houses. He could do anything. He just put it online and put people in a position where they can succeed. That's what you got to do in politics, and I don't, because to me it's obvious. He's not going to. You're right. He's not going to succeed in a debate. He's not going to succeed, you know, giving a fiery speech and, you know, among hay bales, anything like that. Where he's going to succeed is by his resolve, by his knowledge, by his depth, by his politeness, his humanity. That's what people want.
Yeah.
But you got to put him in there where he can succeed.
Well, he could win, and B, he could govern. And boy, those are two pretty important requisites right now. I was going to switch to someone else. Pete Buttigieg is having his moment in the sun now, coming up in the polls, doing really well in Iowa and well in New Hampshire too. Right now, you are in the Buttigieg campaign strategist weekly meeting on Sunday. What are you thinking? What are you worried about? What are you anticipating? What are you advising?
Well, the first thing that they worried about, because everybody keeps doing it and they keep responding, is can he connect with African-American voters? All right, that seems to be the obsession of the people covering the campaign. It seems to be the obsession with the Buttigieg campaign. I was at the thing last night to DGA, a very prominent African-American political operative attorney said, you know, Buttigieg was in the state. And I think something I probably know a little bit more about than most consultants is African-American voters in the South. And if you try to connect with them, they're going to figure that out. And the more natural you are and the more comfortable you are, the more that they're going to give you a listen. And he just got to take a look, because culturally, he's viewed, you know, and in the South Bend, he said, well, the schools are segregated, they're bringing everything up. And it's not a given that he will be able to connect with black voters. That's not a given. But he needs to get a strategy, and my strategy would be just be as natural as you can, you know, talk about the struggle. I wouldn't make any references, but I know discrimination, and you do, but, you know, talk about the struggle and talk about all this stuff, and he's got to try to break in. And, you know, he could probably get some of the younger African-Americans, but the older ones vote a lot, and he's got to break into that. And, you know, they got to deal with it. But don't try too hard.
Yeah, and it is a challenge. Now, he had a good appearance this week. He went to the Reverend William Barber's church in North Carolina, who is I think probably it's safe to say, the most prominent African-American leader in in the Tar Heel state, and he apparently made a good impression. And he did almost exactly what you're talking about. He didn't try to soar, because he's not going to soar now, but just was was himself. And it is a challenge, but that's the sort of thing he has to do.
Yeah, and the definition of a great politician is someone who is really trying but doesn't look like they're trying. It's the definition of a great athlete. I mean, Willie Mays never looked like he tried. Believe me, he was trying like crazy, all right? Reagan or Clinton or even Obama, they never looked like they were sweating. If you look like you're trying too hard, you become Bobby Jindal, or you become Kamala Harris, or you're just trying and to trying to do what no one knows, but it looks desperate. Great politicians always are cool under fire, and they place themselves in the most natural position. And that would be my advice to Bennett. That would be my advice to Buttigieg. Don't just be as natural as you can. Talk about issues about the entire country, and as you start winning, they'll start looking at you hard.
James, one of our great weekly highlights, our own Jimmy the Greek, Christy Numbers Harvey. What do you have for us today, Christy?
Hey, fellas. I do have a couple of numbers for you today. First up is 25%, as in there's new research out that shows 1 out of 4 teens, that's 25%, have an unhealthy addiction to their smartphones. That the researchers are saying could be bigger than a bigger health problem than substance abuse or gaming, which are usually the two addictions that plague teens the most. So I was wondering, Hunt, I think I know this answer since I get texts from you every 20 minutes or so, but do you think you're addicted to your smartphone?
Oh, I think it's a lot more than every 20 minutes, Christy, and has been for the last 25 years. I guess I didn't have smartphones 25 years ago, to your great relief. Christy used to work with me. Fortunately, I don't have any teenagers in the house anymore, but I'm afraid when it comes to my iPhone that I act like one. I am on it all the time, and they go through these periodic times where you should give up your iPhone for a day or even a weekend. I start and then I cheat. I love it, and I'm attached to it, and I can't drop it.
I actually cannot imagine a world where you were cut off like that, Al.
No, of course I use it all the time. But why is this? When I was young, they said porn was a public health crisis. Well, I watch porn all the time. I don't know. I don't think I'm any worse for it. I mean, it's not like they're out there. I mean, if ought to watch where they're going, they get run over by a car. But I don't know if this is like a public health crisis on a magnitude. Oh, God, we got to do something. They're looking at Playboy magazine in the back of the newsstand. Because everybody's addicted to it. I can't go anywhere without the thing.
Well, James, you can have a twofer now, because with your iPhone, you can now look up your porn sites.
All right.
But my point is, I don't know if this is a giant public health crisis. It's something we should do. But that's my only point.
All right. Moving on, Christy.
The second number, I've got a couple of numbers on a more serious note about rural America. As you know, Uncle Joe is on his No Malarkey tour across Iowa. And as a child of Delaware, I can call him Uncle Joe, of course. And so I started to think about these rural issues. And did you guys know that the poverty rate in rural America is 16.4%, compared to urban America, where it's 12.9%. And food insecurity, where people don't always have enough money to buy all the food for everybody in their family, is 12% in rural America, whereas urban America, it's 10.8%. Yet rural America consistently goes red in elections, and there just seems to be just such a disconnect with this. James, I was wondering if you had thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, people in urban America have probably 5 to 7, 8 years more life expectancy than people in rural America. That's just a fact. Also, almost 2/3 the growth that has occurred since Trump has been president have been in counties that the Democrats carried, that Hillary carried. So it's killing them. That red state governance is actually killing people by not expanding health care, by not. But also, as opposed to people Democrats in urban America who are doing good, looking down on them. We ought to figure a way to go out and engage in rural America and try to be a majoritarian party and spend time out there and talk about the kind of things we don't. I don't know why we don't have a rural crisis center in this country. It's a problem, and by the way, there's a lot of African American people that live in rural America. I mean, look around. A lot of Native Americans live in rural America. They're being drugged down by this too. So I think what you're talking about is an enormous issue in American politics. The geographic divide is starting to look like the income inequality divide.
Yeah.
Well, James has been on this for a long time, and he's absolutely right. And the Democrats have really abdicated in a lot of those places. Look, I think, having spent a little bit of time in places like Western Pennsylvania, I think some of it is cultural. Some of it is things like guns and abortion, which are going to be hard. There's no way to compromise on some of that as much as you'd like to. But some of it also is a feeling that the Democrats represent the elites and they look down on people. I was in this little town in Western Pennsylvania, James, right before the 2016 election. Paul Begala suggested I go there, Manassas. Bob Casey used to go there all the time. And, this was right before the election, and I must have had 3 or 4 people say to me, literally, volunteer, when Hillary Clinton talked about the deplorables, she was talking about me. And somehow Democrats have to get out of that. I mean, Donald Trump is an elitist of the first order, but he is so shrewd and so disingenuous, he convinces them he's one of them. And that's a challenge for Democrats.
It is, but you got to engage, right?
Yeah, you do.
And there's a lot of, you got to, all we got to do is just not get slaughtered out there. Cut it to 75-25, not 85-15. And if they keep going, their voting behavior continues to harden. And, of course, you've got a substantial number of Democrats, like at the New York Times op-ed page, that talk about the choice of Democrats is obviously they got to double down on their urban base. Okay, well, then what do you say when you say 18% of the country elects 52 senators? Then they start mumbling and you're not woke enough or whatever the hell they tell you. I mean, these people are really, really, really stupid on steroids.
Yeah, they are. And as you said, if you look at why the Democrats were able to win in deep red states, like the governor's races at least, in deep red states like Kentucky and Louisiana last month, it was because they cut into those margins in those rural areas. They didn't win a lot of them, but they cut into those margins. Numbers, you've done it again. And you'll come back next week with a new challenge, okay?
All right, guys. See you next time. Stay off those phones.
By the way, if you're going to use your numbers, would you use them, please, to re-sign Rendon and Strasburg, all right?
Oh, man. I'm trying. I promise.
James, what have you read that strikes you the last couple of days?
I read a New York Review of Books, which, for me, I find it bats about 100. But boy, when it's Dave Kingman, when it hits hard. And there's a piece in there about an academic named Joseph O'Neill, I think, about 2 books that I think both of them were women academics, wrote about how the Democratic Party is going about the wrong way. I think essentially I'd like to get Professor O'Neill on is that we need to organize more from the ground up, like the Republicans did in 2010. There's no doubt that they caught us sleeping in 2010 and have just racked up through just, ruthlessness and, out-organizing the Democrats, took over power in a lot of states. We're starting to finally get some of it back. But as we go into 2020, I think this is the new kind of thinking that people in politics should at least consider engaging in. I got to read it 2 or 3 more times before I can totally digest it.
Well, okay, that's a great idea. Let's get him on the show.
Yeah.
Let's move to the back page, and we have gone and talked a lot about politics and impeachment, which is kind of a downer. Let's talk football, especially the National Football League. Now, with no hometown team, this is me, unlike you, to cheer for. And concerns, I do have more concerns about the violence of the game, so I've lost some of the intense interest I used to have. But as we head into the final 4 weeks of this season, I can't remember where there were ever so many good teams, all of whom I think have a shot at winning the Super Bowl. I mean, it really is, an incredibly impressive top-heavy league right now.
I got to agree with you. I mean, I'm a little bit more into college football than you are, but
Yeah, we'll do that next
San
week.
Francisco, Baltimore, Seattle, Kansas City, the Saints for sure. I mean, anybody could win. New England, I think their demise has been exaggerated somewhat. Something tells me that Belichick and Brady had schemes going up there. It's just like the demise of Alabama football. Don't buy that. Don't buy that at all. But yes, it is. And the playoffs, at least going into them, man, they look like they're going to be great. I mean, and you can't say it's not like Golden State where you knew they were going to win. You don't have any idea who's going to win this thing.
I agree. I tried to rank them just before I came over here. And if I ranked them right now, I would have number 1, the Ravens. They have an MVP quarterback, a great defense, and a great coach. 2 would be your Saints and the indomitable Drew Brees. 3 would be the Patriots. You're right. You never count out Brady or Belichick in a playoff. They usually rise to it. And 4th, I would have the Seahawks with Russell Wilson. So that's my top 4, and I would not be at all surprised.
49ers.
Well, if the Packers, 49ers, or the Buffalo Bills, or even conceivably the Texans. I mean, none of those are outlandish choices.
But I think the 49ers are really good. I mean, look, Baltimore beat them on the road, by field goal. I watched them beat Green Bay. I mean, they beat the snot out of the Packers, and I mean they're tough. Somehow or another, when you think of San Francisco, you equate maybe just because of the city or Bay Area, some element of softness to it. That is not a soft team, not at all.
No, it's not.
And we got to play them Sunday, and
that'll be a great game. And then I think it's the final game of the season for that conference. Is the 49ers and the Seahawks. Man, will that be the first game between those two was fabulous, and the second game is going to be just as good.
Who's the league MVP now? Is it Russell Wilson?
I think it's probably Lamar Jackson. But, again, there's 5 candidates. I mean, Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers end up taking it to the Super Bowl. I guess they vote before the playoffs, but, you can't rule them out. As I say.
I think it's going to go.
Yeah,
I think it's going to go to Wilson or Lamar Jackson.
I agree. I think they're certainly the favorites right now. One more note about professional football. This week, Jerry Jones in Dallas said, he's basically upset. He's probably going to replace the coach at the end of the year, and Dan Snyder's going to have a review of his whole organization. I mean, Dan Snyder and Jerry Jones have not had teams in the Super Bowl for a quarter century. They both have not had the Redskins worse. They both, for this entire decade or two, have been also Rans, with occasional exceptions for the Cowboys. The problem with Jerry Jones and Dan Snyder is to look in the mirror. The reason that the Rooneys and Bob Kraft win is because they have good ownership that picks good people and doesn't interfere. That's the simple lesson.
Yeah, I would add the Saints to that. We've been a pretty elite football team here for a while.
You have.
You have. Yeah, last year, we had that terrible call, and we had the thing in Minnesota the year before that. We won a lot of games, and Ms. Benson does not interfere with Dennis Lausch and Sean Payton and those guys running the team.
That's the secret.
And I mean, you can just look across and you see success like that. The Rizzos the learners let Mike Rizzo do what he had to do.
Yeah.
Coach Osriel lets Joe Brady coach the quarterback. I mean, there's a success formula here.
Yeah, it is. And, Jerry Jones was once hot. And, I think he began to, believe his own clippings, and he has interfered, not as much as Dan Snyder. And he's not nearly the bad owner that Dan Snyder is. But, when you haven't been in a Super Bowl in 25 years, I think you've had a losing record. Net over the last 20 years, it tells you something. It's not just one coach, not just one quarterback.
The problem is you kind of like Jerry Jones because he is, but
he's a rascal.
He's very good at what he does. He's like, he's a hustler. Okay, he's an operator, and he doesn't. You don't like Danny Snyder, all right? You watch Jerry Jones in the game, he's getting all mad, and fretting around, and you hear him, and he's a real in that kind of bigger than life Texas way. I've met him 4 or 5 times, and he's just a salesman. That's all he is. But he's not full of shit because he's got the most valuable probably franchise in professional sport. Dan Snyder is just not. You're not even interested in talking to him. You don't care what he says. He's just not in addition to being a terrible owner, he's not a very compelling person.
Oh, it's really, if you look at awful franchises in professional sports, the Redskins are in the top 3 or 4. There's no question of that. And I agree about Jerry Jones, but I think probably Jerry Jones would give up some of that value, not all of it for sure. If he could get back to Super Bowls and winning championships, and he can't do that until he starts to delegate and realize he can't call
Jason
shots.
Garrett is like a low-level infection. You can't get rid of it, but it's not going to kill you. And every time they get ready to fire him, he wins a game.
Yeah, yeah. Also, coaches.
Dak Prescott is good.
Well, Dak Prescott's very good, but also coaches go back. Remember a year ago they were talking about the L.A. Rams close Sean McVay. He was the future of the NFL. Where are the Rams now? I mean, this is a tough league. There aren't very many Belichicks.
Everybody's looking for the next Sean McVay.
Right.
You got to look for the next Bill Belichick.
All right,
this
has been terrific. We'll look for not the next, but the James Carville a week from now. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be with you next week.